Ukrainian forces successfully bypass Russian defenses, easily crossing the Dnieper River and heading towards Crimea. From the south, Ukrainian troops demonstrate the ability to cross the Dnieper. The available recording shows forces from Kiev easily crossing the river, which is related to rumors about Russia's possible withdrawal from the opposite bank. On November 14th, Ukrainian forces continued their ground operations on the eastern shore of Kherson Oblast with a confirmed attack. The November 13th publications, based on geolocation, indicate the advance of Ukrainian forces in the Krynky area, located 30 kilometers northeast of the city of Kherson, 2 kilometers from the Dnieper River, and approximately 3.5 kilometers north of the E58 highway. In turn, Russian milbloggers reported on November 14th about Ukraine's attempts to expand control near Krynky. A high-ranking Kremlin-linked blogger claimed that Russia was moving units from unspecified locations to counter Ukrainian attacks in the Krynky area. Another Russian blogger suggested that Russian forces had repelled Ukrainians from unknown positions near Krynky, but the Institute of War Studies, ISW, did not observe visual evidence to support these claims. Additionally, the same blogger reported intense fighting in the areas of Poyma, Pishchanivka, and Pishchanivka, 10, 13, and 17 kilometers from Kherson, respectively, near the Dnieper River. Russian sources claimed their forces were using artillery fire to prevent Ukrainian personnel and equipment from moving to the eastern bank. On the same day, November 14th, Russian forces launched air and artillery attacks on the western bank of the Kherson Oblast. Ukrainian Southern Operational Command reported that in the last 24 hours, Russian forces carried out 5 airstrikes using 33 glide bombs on civilian areas in the region. Russian milbloggers added that Russia continues air and artillery attacks and uses 2S-1A thermobaric artillery systems on the western bank. On November 14th, Russian forces conducted limited ground attacks on the border between Donetsk and Zaporozhye oblasts, achieving confirmed advances. Geolocation materials released on November 13 showed that Russian forces were advancing west of Novodonetsk, 12 kilometers southeast of Veliki Novosilka. The Vostok Battalion, deployed on the border of these regions, indicated that unfavorable weather conditions would continue to pose an obstacle to ground operations until the ground solidified, adding that fighting in the area had become positional in nature. Published materials from November 13th and 14th allegedly depicted the activities of elements of the Russian 30th Artillery Brigade of the Combined Army Eastern Military District and the Marine Brigade of the Pacific Fleet near Velika Novosilka. Additionally, the activities of the Russian Separate Covering Brigade of the Allied Armed Forces Eastern Military District operating near Zahirne, 11 kilometers southwest of Hulia were also shown. On November 15th, Russia officially admitted for the first time that Ukrainian forces had taken positions on the eastern bank of the Kherson Oblast on the occupied Dnieper River. Volodymyr Saldo, the leader installed by Russia in the occupied part of the oblast, reported on his Telegram channel that small groups of Ukrainian soldiers had moved from a railway bridge in the oblast to Krynka, a village located about 35 kilometers east of Kherson and 2 kilometers southeast of Dnieper River. Saldo claimed that Ukrainian troops in Krynky were under heavy Russian fire and suffering heavy losses. However, independent sources such as Kiev Independent were unable to verify these claims. Nataliya Humenyuk, spokeswoman for Ukraine's Southern Operational Command, said Russian forces were actively defending themselves near the Dnieper and that Ukrainian actions pushing back the Russians took place 3 to 8 kilometers along the shore. Since February, Ukraine has been conducting airstrikes on the occupied eastern bank of the Dnieper River, increasing the intensity of these attacks in August. The British Ministry of Defense already reported in July that Ukrainian forces were maintaining a bridgehead near the Antonivsky Bridge. Russian military bloggers have been reporting in recent weeks about the Ukrainian military establishing bridgeheads on the occupied shore, and geolocated footage from October 19th confirmed Ukraine's presence in Krynky. Experts speaking to the Kyiv Independent noted that if Ukraine manages to concentrate armored strike forces on the eastern bank, it could have disastrous consequences for Russian troops. However, it is unclear how Ukraine will cope with Russia's air superiority, and amphibious strikes are extremely difficult. On November 14th, Ukrainian forces took offensive actions in the western part of the Zaporizhia Oblast and carried out a confirmed attack. Geolocation materials from the same day show Ukrainian units advancing northwest from the town of Verbova, 10 kilometers east of Robotyne. The General Staff of Ukraine reported on the continuation of offensive operations towards Melitopol, located in the western Zaporizhia Oblast. Russian sources claimed that their forces repelled Ukrainian attacks in the area of Robotyne, Novofedorivka, 15 kilometers northeast of Robotyne, as well as north and northwest of Verbov. One Russian milblogger claimed that units of the Russian 1430 Regiment, allegedly consisting of personnel mobilized from the Moscow Oblast and a motorized rifle regiment from the 42nd Motorized Rifle Division, 58th Combined Army, Southern Military District, repelled Ukrainian attacks along the line Pyatikatki, Robotyne, Verbova, extending from approximately 25 kilometers northwest of Robotyne to 10 kilometers east of that city. On the same day, Russian forces conducted offensive operations in the western Zaporizhia Oblast, but no confirmed progress was reported. One Russian milblogger claimed that the Russians had taken unspecified Ukrainian positions near Robotyne, but the Institute for War Studies, ISW, observed no visual evidence to support this claim. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that their forces repelled Russian attacks in the Robotyne area. Another Russian blogger reported that Russian forces activated near Pyatikatki, 25 kilometers northwest of Robotyne, and captured several new unspecified positions, while yet another blogger claimed that the sector of the front near Pyatikatki and Zherebienki, 27 kilometers northwest of Robotyne, remained stable with intermittent gunfire. Russia's Human Rights Commissioner Tatiana Moskalkova has proposed writing off the debts of Russians fighting in Ukraine, Russian state media TASS reported on November 15th. This suggestion came after Vladimir Putin, the dictator of Russia, signed the law of December 2022, which completely or partially suspended the repayment of debts of Russian soldiers in Ukraine. Repayments were to resume 30 days after the soldier ended hostilities. Moskalkova expressed the opinion that the need to repay debts after returning from the front is unfair and may lead to social tensions. According to data from the Russian Federal Bailiff Service, FSSP, over 300,000 payments were suspended in the entire year 2022, and in the first half of 2023, 125,000. This suspension did not apply to maintenance claims. In addition, there were concerns about the upcoming social crisis in Russia due to the return of soldiers from Ukraine. An RFE-RL report from June 2023 highlighted concerns among Russian healthcare experts about the rise of drug and alcohol addiction among returning veterans. Health experts also predicted other social consequences. In August 2023, The Guardian reported that Russian women feared increased threats of murder, rape, and domestic violence due to the return of convicts who had fought for Wagner's mercenary group in Ukraine. The RAND Corporation in June 2023 warned of the emergence of a Ukrainian syndrome, analogous to the earlier Afghan and Chechen syndromes, which describes Russian veterans' difficulties in adapting to civilian life, lack of support, and problems with PTSD and other conditions after returning from Ukraine. A Russian delegation led by Natural Resources Minister Alexander Kozlov visited Pyongyang, North Korea's state media reported on Wednesday. The visit is raising concerns in Washington and Seoul, especially after remarks by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who warned that the growing and dangerous relationship between Pyongyang and Moscow would require intervention by their ally China to contain a nuclear-armed North Korea. The delegation arrived in Pyongyang on Tuesday to discuss cooperation in the fields of trade, economy, science, and technology. Russia and North Korea, which are historic allies, are subject to international sanctions. Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, and North Korea for its nuclear and missile programs. South Korea accuses the North of providing Moscow with more than 1 million pieces of artillery for use in its war with Ukraine, and says the North received advice on satellite technology in return. The latest Russian visit follows criticism from G7 diplomats who have criticized authorized arms transfers and called on North Korea and Russia to stop such activities. After the September summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin, both countries tightened their cooperation. Kim traveled to Russia in a special bulletproof train, declaring that bilateral relations with Moscow were a priority for his country. The Russian delegation laid a wreath at the Mansudae Grand Monument in Pyongyang, and at a reception in one of the capital's largest hotels, officials agreed to further revitalize bilateral relations. The North Korean delegation also went to Russia for a forum in the city of Perm. Analysts such as An Chan-il, a defector and researcher who heads the World Institute for North Korea Studies, say the moves indicate the two countries' desire to emphasize their growing alliance despite global criticism. Pyongyang could potentially expand its trade by exporting war-related goods to Russia in exchange for imports of food and energy resources.